Hello, everyone. It's Charlene Lee here. I'm going to be talking today about worried skeptics. In particular, how do you work with them? So I had a bit of a computer meltdown here, so I had to go to my backup. So I'm a little bit discombobulated, to be honest. But I'm going to go through with this, and I want to talk a little bit about what does it mean to work with these worried skeptics. And the reason why I think this is so important is that every organization has worried skeptics. And these are the people who are most resistant to change. Frankly, any type of change, but especially the big disruptive, transformative changes that are very much required today to be able to not just survive, but thrive in the environments that we're in. So I want to talk a little bit about that and also welcome anybody who may be joining here today. Please share where you're coming from. It's always fascinating to hear where people are coming from. But also, I would love to hear about the situations you're facing. Who are the people that are really fighting the change? They cling to the status quo, and they just feel like, no matter what you do, no matter what you say, no matter what kind of burning platforms you put in front of them to try to get them to move out of that status quo, they won't budge. They tend to sit back, cross their arms, and say, bah humbug, this change is ridiculous, we don't need it. Things have always been fine, us doing things this way, so why should we change? Does that sound familiar? Well, let's get into this. Let's talk about who these worried skeptics are. So just to give you an idea of what we're looking at, I wanted to put up this graphic. This is from my research from my latest book, The Disruption Mindset. And what this image shows is that there are two characteristics of disruptive leaders. One is that they tend to be openness to change mindset, which is kind of obvious. You have to want to change if you want to create this disruption. So you have to be really open to it. They see change as an opportunity. They see it as something that's good. They look forward to change. It makes their life exciting. They don't see it as a threat. And then the other key characteristic is that they exhibit these incredible leadership behaviors that really embrace people, empower them, and inspire them, the people around them, to create that change. Because if you truly want to create disruption, it can't just be about you. It has to be about bringing along a team of people. So what happens is that if you do this classic 2x2, you end up with some realist optimists, people who are great at both of these. And they're sitting there with a huge amount of openness to change, and they have the leadership abilities and the behaviors to bring people to that charge. Those are the realist optimists. So the people in the upper right-hand corner there. And they're about 27% of leaders typically in our research. You have the age of provocateurs. This is a place that's very near and dear to my heart because there's a lot of them here in Silicon Valley. These are people who are very much see the change, but may not be as capable in terms of bringing people along. So the people who tend to walk on a stage, say, disrupt or die, and then walk off the stage and nothing has changed. That was so important because they set the vision. They inspire people to think about what that change could look like, but they may not be that well versed in terms of actually making that change happen. Then we have the steadfast managers. They get things done. They bring people together. They align everyone around a particular objective, and they march towards it, and they get things done. But they may not be as comfortable creating huge amounts of change. Stepwise change, a little bit, like 5 or 10% change, they can manage that. But big, transformative, disruptive change, that makes them crazy. And they're the vast majority of people. They're about 50%, half of the leaders out there. And then let's get to the worried skeptics, because you may be shaking your heads. I'm like, look at those people in the bottom left-hand corner. They don't really appreciate change. They step away from that, and they're much more focused on a smaller circle of influence. It's really about what they see and what they can do and control. Now, you may be thinking, why can't we just ignore those worried skeptics? Let's just shove them to the side and move as fast as we can. Well, the reality is those worried skeptics are probably the linchpin to your transformation. You can't ignore them because they'll be standing sometimes on the sidelines, crossing their arms, so you have to spend a lot of energy dragging them along. Or they may actively be fighting you, fighting the change because they fundamentally don't believe in it. And frankly, there's so much work to be done. It's so urgent to make this transformation. You can't afford to have people who aren't on your team. So the thing that's interesting about these worried skeptics is that there are actual ways to work with them. So before I get into that, I just want to welcome this. There's so many people who are on the feed here. So thank you, Nathaniel, joining from Ghana. Thank you for joining in. Sarah coming in from Houston, Texas. Kirsten from London. You got Laura from Milan. Anandra coming in from Abu Dhabi. Great to see you. You can join us. We have Menkit Young coming in also. And then we also have Brian coming in from Vancouver. Mohammed from Saudi Arabia. John from Manchester. And Mengisi coming in from Manzinga Eswatini. Sorry if I didn't say that correctly. And Jacqueline from Lima. So this is a great crew. I thank you so much for joining, everyone. And I think one of the questions I'm already getting, and thank you, Meng, for asking this, is what if this worried skeptic is hanging on to the old normal as the owner or the leader of the company? That's really hard because especially in family-owned businesses or small businesses, they built the business on their backs. It was their hard work and their sweat and tears that built this business. And they may have been at it for a decade or even 50 years. And they know what worked. But at this point, what they thought worked in the past may not be working today or into the future. So how do you bring them along? And we'll talk about that in just a second. So these are really tough questions. And the thing that I want to say is that for the worried skeptics, we need to change our own mindsets as disruptive leaders. Instead of thinking them as this grindstone hanging around our necks, how do we think about them instead as an asset? So I'll tell you what doesn't work. And I'm just looking at my notes here. What doesn't work here is that we focus on all the usual business metrics, all the usual business responses. It's about growing our market share, our top line revenues, our bottom line profitability. It's about the competition. The competition is doing this or that. We should be responding to the market. None of those arguments I have found over the years really work with the worried skeptics. The only thing, and this is the first step of working with your worried skeptics, the only thing I have ever seen work is that you align them around what your customers need, and in particular about who your future customers is. The reason why this is so important is that the reason why they first came into the company, the reason why they first joined the organization is because they believed in what the company is doing. That family founder, the patriarch, the owner, original person created the company to serve a purpose. And so when you center in on that purpose, on the reason why you exist, and it's almost always about serving a need of a customer group, that's what brings people together and that brings an alignment. If you can't connect with that worried skeptic about the fundamental reason about why they joined the organization in the first place, then you won't be able to really move forward. So one of the reasons why I think it's so important for us to be thinking about this is that when we look at the worried skeptics and the motivations for why they want to join or why they hang on to the past is because they believe it works for this customer group. So one of the most important things to do is to, again, connect them with this customer. And the hardest part is if you don't have an agreement of who that customer is, and in particular, who that future customer is. This is, if you can convince that worried skeptic, you should be doing this for not just them, but for everybody in the organization. Fundamental question, do you know who your customers are? And in particular, where your customers are going? Because if you don't know that, it's really hard to build a strategy and a momentum to move into that new place to be able to serve that customer. So I keep going back to the fundamentals here, and I sound like a broken record. but make sure your worried skeptics are aligned with you that this is the right customer to go after. These are the future customers you want to be serving. And make sure you're aligned on that. The way you get there, the how you get there, that can come next. But if you're not aligned on even the fundamentals about who your customers are and what their needs are, you have bigger issues. And this is the key point, and you cannot move beyond this until you address this issue. If that worried skeptic is not aligned on the fundamental question of your purpose, of your strategy, of what you stand for as a brand, then you cannot move forward with that worried skeptic. And you need to have a different conversation. Is this the right place? Do you want to continue? That fundamental question of what we are trying to do. After that, then, the key question is, okay, if they feel comfortable with it, they're still a little bit worried about how we're going to get there. The second and most important thing to do around this is to create a very different type of environment for that worried skeptic. And again, this benefits everybody in the organization. And that is to create safety and security and stability, not so that you stay in place, but so that you create this foundation, this place of certainty and clarity and safety, so that you can use as a foundation to jump off of, to push off of into this uncertain space. It's really hard to ask people to take on a lot of uncertainty when everything back at the base, back at the home company and the organization is in chaos. So this means putting in place very clear processes, putting in rituals and standards and recognitions and ways to build that structure and stability deeply into the organization so that when things are really uncertain here, you at least know how work is going to get done. In my study of disruptive organizations, it was the most counterintuitive finding that I had. That disruptive organizations, the ones who are constantly moving fast and breaking things, are incredibly well-run organizations. They have a lot of processes, but just enough to keep people focused on those customers and those future customers. Just enough processes to be absolutely clear on how information is going to be shared and how decisions are going to be made. And they have the rituals, these shared experiences to remind each other what these passings, what these processes do to, again, build that inclusion and belonging of that team, create that safety and stability, and then be able to move fast into new areas. I can't emphasize enough that this is what worried skeptics need. They need to feel secure. They need to know that certain things are not going to change in order to take on all the new changes that are happening to the organization. The third area that I think is important to take a look at is how you actually take the skills and the gifts and expertise of worried skeptics. Because again, it's so easy to just push them to the side and say, well, you're not change oriented and you don't embrace this completely. What good are you going to be? Well, they're good at one thing in particular, and that is they're skeptical. They naturally look at all the things that can go wrong. They can look at a plan and just go, well, what about this? What about that? What about all these other things that could go wrong? So tap into that. Tap into their ability to identify the risk and then create the mitigation plans for this. In many cases, that's what worried skeptics do. They're the ones who are sitting back and having to clean up the mess that all of us disruptors make. They're the ones picking up all the pieces and trying to hold things together. So if you can tap into that expertise, that experience, and frankly, something that they do really, really well, then you actually complete your team. You have your realist optimists making that change, the agent provocateurs working with the steadfast managers to complete the gaps that they have. And the worried skeptics are there saying, oh, well, wait a minute. Have you thought about these 3 things? And it stops everyone in their tracks, makes us all think about how we could have missed those 3 things thank you so much, Worried Skeptics, for bringing that thing up to our attention. So this is a really key part about working with Worried Skeptics. They are a gift to the organization. They're not a burden. And when you can see them in that way, then you can pull all the different types of leaders into your team and create that cohesive, holistic approach and create alignment. Because I want to just put up that graphic again, because when you look at this, this is very much relative to everybody else. You could be highly disruptive in one organization. You could be a realist optimist in one organization, but you go to another one that's even faster moving than you are, you suddenly are the worried skeptic. So don't assume that somebody is a worried skeptic. It's because they are always going to be that way. What I have found is that when you can create that structure, we can create that stability, and you recognize their contributions, then you have an incredibly productive worried skeptic rather than one who's sitting by the side causing a lot of problems. So I want to just say hello to a few more people who have joined in. We have Femi coming in from Togo. We have someone coming in from India. I'm sorry I don't see your name. And we have Professor Sripa Santwani coming in from India. And Carol, thank you so much for this comment about how to form a great team. I do believe that disruptive transformation, any sort of transformation, is a team sport, and it is a high contact sport, meaning you're going to come into a lot of contact with your team. And if you have a stubborn, intransigent, worried skeptic, it's time to really sit down with them, understand where they are coming from, and really bring them in terms of understanding how they can understand who the customers are, who your future customers are, and how they can contribute. But the big caveat that if they don't buy into the strategy, then you need to be ready to have a different type of conversation about whether this is the right place for them. Let's see, let's take a look at this great comment from John. If you endorse the worried skeptic view wholeheartedly, does it risk them becoming even more entrenched? This is the key. You cannot afford them to be entrenched. I feel that if you embrace them and you see and understand that they are they're coming from a particular perspective, again, because they believe that the old world worked, that the new world is not going to be the one that they believe in, then you need to make sure that you are aligned in terms of understanding where that world is. And I was talking to one leader, and she was saying, this is really hard. It's my grandfather. And grandfather knows what's right. And I'm the young person, just graduated from college with all these new ideas. How do I bring my grandfather along? And I think, again, going back to who that founder is, their enthusiasm, ask them for the stories of how did they actually start. And they will remember the passion and the reasons why they started the company. And when she did that, when she went back and talked to the family patriarch and said, look, I want to tap into that enthusiasm. Share with me again why we started this company, why we here, the purpose, and our customers. And they had a discussion. They had a coming together and sharing. They still didn't agree on everything. But they began that conversation where she began to understand where he was coming from, and he began to understand, for her perspective, how things were changing. And so this is the important part. That I think the most important part is not to let that worried skeptic stay entrenched. So, John, to your question, when you embrace the worried skeptic, I rarely see that they stay entrenched. Again, if you have that commitment that they have to move with you into the new strategy, or they have to move out of that department, that team, or even the company. And those are really, really hard discussions to have. But you can't have those discussions unless you've given it a try. All right, the one last thing I would recommend is to think about this idea of creating a burning platform. And one of the things I hear from people oftentimes is, what if we just create a burning platform? We make it so uncomfortable that the worried skeptics have to jump into the fire, into the boiling waters below you. And I think that's one approach, but I don't think it's a sustainable one. And that worried skeptic will resent having been pushed off of that burning platform. It is so much more effective if you can create the different, which is a pull rather than a push, pulling into this future, pulling and helping them see the optimism that you see, the potential for growth. And understanding that growth and change is really, really hard. Don't sugarcoat it. Don't try to make it seem like it's going to be a utopia. Everything's going to be perfect. It's not. And the worried skeptic can see that. So when you can acknowledge those fears, when you can acknowledge the skepticism, you can acknowledge the painful road ahead, you actually aren't buying into the worried skeptic. You're being that realist optimist that's so important in that disruption journey. All right, I'm going to end at this point. I encourage you to continue asking any questions that you may have. I do check the comments to see if there are any additional questions that come up from this. And I wish you all the best in working with your worried skeptics. Believe me, they can be incredibly trying, incredibly frustrating to work with. But I think if you give them a chance, sit down and have a dialogue with them, you'll find that that relationship can be improved. And not just improve, actually become a rich and very fulfilling one for both. I wish you all the best when working with your worried skeptics. And thank you so much for listening to this broadcast. Have a great day.